welcome back to Fast Politics, Miles Taylor.
Oh, it's so good to be here, my friend. I always love talking to you. I wish I could just have you in my ear all day long, just bucking me up when things get shitty and calling me out if I'm not moving fast enough on something.
No. I am like known to be very smushy. It's not like I go on Fox News to announce military actions like our leader in chief. I am again without words about Trump tells military. This is I want to read you a headline from the BBC. Like, imagine how you're at the BBC and you see this huge country that is so fucked. And you have to come up with headlines. I mean, just like, okay, so here it is. Trump tells military to prepare for quote unquote action against Islamist militants in Nigeria. He tells them on Fox News, as one does.
I'll say one thing at the top end, which is if there is any place that screams quagmire, it would be going into Nigeria and starting a war. And so many of the president's allies in the MAGA movement who allegedly voted for him to stop the forever wars.
Yeah, I remember that. That was season 1.
They should be mortified by the prospect that we might get entangled in a spiraling conflict in Nigeria. Now, what you can also say is it's reasonable and possible for the United States to go after terrorists if they are in Nigeria using over-the-horizon capabilities. I mean, look, if there's an ISIS or al-Qaeda cell in Nigeria plotting against the United States, sure, we have the ability to go after them. But talking about going to war in Nigeria, that's not a decision the president should make. That's a decision Congress should make.
And also on Fox and Friends. Fox and Friends has now become, and this happened in Trump 1.0 too, has become the sort of central propaganda organization. It's sort of where he gets his messaging out, where he talks to his people, where he talks to the army.
Yeah, and also talk about a sensitive national security decision and ruining the element of surprise.
Right.
That would be like if George W. Bush had gone on The View and said, Tuesday at 7 p.m., the missiles will start landing in Baghdad. I mean, you don't go do that. And, in a sense, this is as bad or worse as Signalgate. But this time, the president isn't even trying to protect these things on encrypted apps. He's just going and telegraphing military action out there. But again, I would say, just like what we are seeing in Venezuela,
Yeah.
this is one of those things where, as a conservative, I say this is why the founders said Congress makes the determination of whether we go to war, because when that doesn't happen, we get entangled in extraordinarily costly foreign conflicts. And Donald Trump, the peacemaker president, on the path to get us into 2 new wars before year's end.
So can you explain to me this schizophrenia? Because Donald Trump, like 2 weeks ago, he was trying to get a Nobel Prize. I feel like he didn't totally understand the timeline of the Nobel Peace Prize. So he's like, it comes out in a week, so let's try now, right? And he had like he had this list of all these wars he had ended. And just saying this list alienated both India and Pakistan because they were like, actually, no. There were a list of all these wars he had ended. So explain to me how you have ending wars, but also which aren't necessarily true, but whatever. Plus, also starting wars. Like, how are these two things true?
They're not. And this is the same Donald Trump I wrote about 7 years ago in the New York Times when I said he is unmoored to any first principles. This man doesn't have first principles. And so when he says he's the peacemaker president, that doesn't mean anything, because the next week he may decide it's more fun to use his power to make war instead of making peace. He renamed the Department of Defense the Department of War, and that wasn't just symbolic. It was representative of his mindset. And I think Donald Trump is finding out what a lot of other presidents before him have found out, is that the zenith of his powers are in foreign and defense policy. Article 2 of the Constitution affords the president's greatest authority when it comes to the conduct of foreign affairs and his commander-in-chief role of the United States military. But unlike all of those former presidents, Donald Trump views those powers as an extension of his personal self-interest. And that's why we are seeing corrupt conduct in foreign policy, him cutting deals with countries that are then weeks later, cutting deals with his company and with his kids, with him taking actions that are favorable towards people who have praised him and unfavorable to those who are not, and in places where he wants to show that he is a strong man. I mean, the blowing up of the boats in the Caribbean against people who do not represent an imminent threat to the United States is not just a war crime. It is almost the perfect encapsulation of a dictator trying to show I am a dictator and I can do whatever I want. The law be damned.
The thing that makes me the most depressed is that in Trump 1.0, there were all of these things he wanted to do that people like you stopped him from doing, right? Like Mattis's and Kelly's, and the people around him said, like, no, no, you can't do that. Let me just move this piece of paper. And Cohen, now it is like anyone who may have seemed like they might have been capable of doing that has decided not to. Marco, JD Vance, this one, that one. Obviously, they were picked because they were malleable, but they must have some kind of calculus here, right?
I think their calculus is that the MAGA movement will control the party forever.
Right.
And the loyalty test right now in the Republican Party is how loyal are you to the leader? And
Right.
so if they can say I was the most loyal to Donald Trump, their calculus is they will continue to have ascendancy within the party. Now, I will also say, Molly, like I'll be the first to concede that during the first Trump administration, this idea of an axis of adults around the president, which was a term that I helped coin. There was a Daily Beast article that our friend Kim Dozier wrote at the
Yeah.
beginning of the administration. I spoke to her and I talked about an axis of adults in the Trump administration. I understand why some people heard that and thought it was obnoxious
Right.
because, they were like, look, you're unelected bureaucrats. This isn't your job. And, oh, way to pat yourselves on the back. Why don't you come out here and join the resistance and fight this guy from the outside? I get it. But
Right.
I now finally think after years, folks are starting to see why people who wanted to prevent the president from doing illegal things were needed in the White House. A
Oh,
lot of mistakes were made by the axis of adults. It was a moral choose your own adventure. And I'm sure I chose many of the wrong paths along the way. But at the end of the day, the so-called deep state wasn't a group of people conspiring to stop the president from doing things he was allowed to do. The
right.
president's allowed to do stupid shit. Once they're
Right.
elected, as long as they're complying with the law, they can put bad policies in place as long as it doesn't break the law. The
True.
people who were pushing back against him, the ones you mentioned, the Mattises and the Kellys, were pushing back against things that were unlawful and unconstitutional. And now, as you note, a group of people who don't want to do that, who just want to say yes to the things Trump wants, are very clearly enabling the scariest actions we've ever seen of someone sitting in the executive office of the president. And it only gets worse from here. I mean, if any of them have an acorn of a conscience
Right.
and they do decide to exert it, they will be gone very, very quickly. And they know that. And then you're left really, truly with the diehard loyalists who are willing to, some of them are very willing to break the law for him because they're confident that he will come in and protect them and offer them pardons. And that's where I would say to them, if I had a chance to talk to Rubio and others, don't think that by committing war crimes and violating the laws of war and breaking the Constitution, that you are going to be fully protected because this guy in the end only cares about himself. And I'm not sure he's going to pardon all y'all when he walks out the door. He may have immunity, at least to the extent that the Supreme Court has spelled it out, but you guys don't. And people have followed illegal orders already in this administration. In fact, it's almost impossible to keep up with how many illegal orders people have complied with. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges if the Democrats retake Congress is documenting that.
I think there are people in this administration now that are actually worse than Trump. Like the Stephen Millers, the Russ Vaughts, like that crew. Like Donald Trump, he's not ideological the way as Stephen Miller is. Like Stephen Miller, I mean, his orders have been, as it's been reported, like go in there and make it look scary, right? I mean,
Mhm.
that's sort of the ethos of ICE. I mean, that crew that you didn't have that in Trump 1.0 the same way.
I'm looking down because I was looking up something in response to that, Molly. I remembered a number of years ago, our friend, Denver Riggleman, former Republican congressman who defected from the party, said something to me that I wrote in my book Blowback, and this is what he said. A GOP Congressman Denver Riggleman pointed to Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin. Quote, Stalin was awful, but you had little Stalins that were much, much more abusive and terroristic than he was because they thought they were allowed to be that way, he said. The return of Trump will bring aides into government who lack character, experience, or both and are ready for retribution. Now, wrote that several years ago, but I
Yeah.
mean, that has come to fruition. And certainly we learned that with the Soviet Union, that the little Stalins were worse because the only way to climb the ladder was to demonstrate that you would be more unseemly than the next guy, that there was no limitation to what you would do for the ruler. In fact, this is so unremarkable because we've seen it throughout history that you can go back 100 years to Friedrich Hayek, who wrote about how this phenomenon of the worst people rising to the top in autocracies had become so consistent. And the reasons for that are, again, quite simple, because when you have a dictator that's all powerful and that's has an inclination toward illegality, you have to demonstrate that you will be the most dedicated to that commission of crimes than the next guy, even more than the next guy or gal. And so you end up with these pretty horrible fucking people, running the show. And we're seeing that. Does it look full North Korea right now? No. But do I think there are people around Donald Trump who would murder for him?
Oh, yeah.
I absolutely do. And in fact, I would say it's already happening. There are people who are engaged in state-sponsored murder right now under this administration, which sounds like a really
ICE
a
killed
radical thing to say, but
ICE
it's
has
true.
killed, at least 3 people, right? I mean, we know that there have been deaths in custody, there have been deaths there have been maybe they weren't direct maybe it wasn't like, "Bang, bang, you're dead," but people have died in custody, which would technically be a murder, right?
And there are people who are legitimately concerned that this administration took very seriously the hypothetical that was presented last June in front of the Supreme Court in the debate about presidential immunity, where the lawyers arguing against the expansive view of presidential immunity said, well, what would stop the president from then directing SEAL Team 6 to go assassinate one of his political rivals? And if you go back and you look at the response from Trump's lawyers, it's a very middling sort of response that's almost a tacit admission of, well, if it was consistent with the president's duties, yeah, he could send SEAL Team 6 to go murder of the political opposition.
Yeah.
Again, remember, it's the same Donald Trump that you know well who said, I could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and get away with it. He doesn't mean that hypothetically. He means that literally. He means he could commit very obvious crimes and get away with it, not just with his supporters. He now believes he can escape justice by doing that. That's as scary as it gets in a constitutional system, I think.
January 6th, there was a moment right after January 6th where it was like it was really during January 6th, where it was almost like Trump was trying to figure out whether he could stay or not, whether he could and you had all these very rich donors of his being like, "Look, man, go home." Right? Remember that? Like, it was like the closest we've ever had to people standing up to him. It was like I remember because I knew some of these people and they said, "It's enough. Like, we love you, man, but you gotta go home." And it was the closest Republicans have ever come to standing up to him. Again, I'm not making a value judgment. I'm just narrating something that happened. It strikes me that we are going to have another situation that's like that. Now, maybe it's not you have to go home. Maybe it's you can't kill these people, or maybe it's you can't jail the entire city of Chicago. I don't know what it's going to be because I'm not a psychic. But clearly, there's going to be a moment where my man does something that is so beyond the pale that his rich friends are like, "You can do autocracy, but not like that, man." Or, and we've seen some of that, right? Like, we saw there are some of these tech bros who've sort of started being like a little bit like, well, or really Joe Rogan has been like, we didn't sign up for that. Or, some of the podcast bros have been like, oh, or do you think that never happens? And I'm just like getting high on my own supply.
I'm not sure if it happens. I think that we're in a far worse place than after. If January, let me put it a different way. If January 6th happened today, Donald Trump has the support within the Republican Party to remain in office.
Yeah.
I believe that firmly. If you had this current Congress in power in that time period and knowing everything that they now know about Donald Trump, they would have stood by him in his effort to remain in office, and he would have remained past the swearing in of the next president, and we would be in a I think a full-on violent conflagration as a
Yeah.
country because people would have gone to the Capitol on the other side of this political spectrum and said, eject the man from power, and it would have gotten very, very ugly. And at the time period, surveys found that 10% of Americans believed, force would be justified to eject one occupant or the other from the White House. Like there was enough Americans ready to take up arms that if
Yeah.
that had happened, we would have been in it. And so now the fact that we have so many people willing to, I think, defend Donald Trump's prerogatives no matter where they go increases the odds of him creating that type of situation. And I do believe that that situation is most likely to be him attempting to remain in power. There's a lot of bad things that will happen, unfortunately, that the American people will look the other way for.
Right.
But the most captivating thing in the public conscience about whether we live in a free country or not is when election time comes. And does
Right.
it feel like it was free and fair or not? And we'll see
Right.
that in 26 and we'll see it in 28. And if past is prologue, we should be smart and recognize the man will not leave public office. That can take a number of forms. He may run as the vice president under J.D. Vance, and they do this wink nod Putin Medvedev thing, which is exactly what happened, basically what happened in Russia. He may try to get named Speaker of the House by the Republicans if they retake the majority in the House, but he does not ever want to be out of an official position
Right.
because he's pretty convinced if he's not in an official position, he'll be in a jail cell. And that's
There's a
probably right.
reason for that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. And
Yeah.
so the guy will stop at nothing. In fact, I have a much harder time with someone presenting me a credible scenario where the guy rides into the sunset. I haven't seen it. I
Yeah.
haven't heard it from anyone. And the denials coming out of the White House now about a third term are about the most tepid denials you
Mhm.
could ever imagine. And they don't mean anything. Donald Trump
Right.
denying something doesn't mean anything. Mark my words, the man will try for a third term. I think he's got a very good chance of remaining in office because they will politicize it instead of Republicans turning against him. I don't
Right.
think they'll tell him to exit stage right. And that puts us in a really, really very
Scary.
alarming position. Now, here's one exception, and the founders wrote about this in the Federalist Papers. The best check on him, the most reliable check on him, is that ambition counters ambition, as I think
Right.
Madison said in Federalist 50, which is he's surrounded by other guys who want to be president. And do they end up breaking from him because they want to take the party a new direction? And that's the biggest threat because then it hives off part of the tribe away from him and it
Right.
creates the inter-tribe rivalry. If no one does that, if none of them have the courage to do it, the tribe will stay firmly behind Donald Trump.
Well, that's I never am gonna sleep again. I didn't need to sleep. I'm fine. I'll just stay up for the next couple years.
I don't sleep much lately.
Yeah.
It's why I look like a slop tart all
Yeah,
day
you
when
look
I'm doing stuff.
terrible, Miles. Just known for your lack of attractiveness. Thank you, Miles. You're the best. Really, will you come back?
Anytime, my friend. Great to be with you as always. Thanks for everything you do.